Just a brief introduction. I'm Henry. I'm one of the cyber officer, and today we'll be talking about introduction to web. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Josh. I'm an intern, and I'll also be helping out with the workshop.
So as I said, today's workshop is based around introduction to web hacking. So we're not going to go into super in detail of one specific kind of attack. This is sort of a setup workshop that will help you better understand the content we'll be covering throughout the remaining of the quarter. Yeah, so this is the general outline. First, we'll be covering like the general structure for a web page, and I'll do a quick demo on how you can look at it, and then I'll go over client server, like basic web server setup, along with the types of attack, and then Josh will take over from that point on to teach you more about obfuscation, cookie, and the rest. Okay, so to begin with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So these three are what we consider to be the three major components of every single web page. Generally, this is like the actual code between the visual you see when you log into a web page. And JavaScript is there to help provide the functionality, as you see here. Oops. Why is this doing that? Okay, as you see here, like this is a script that will have the console, or like it will have a pop-up that says hello world. CSS is used mainly for behavior, such as the color, as well as the styling of the font, whereas HTML is the actual text you'll be seeing. Okay, so just for a brief example, imagine today you're about to attend one of your Zoom lecture, and you log into, or actually, this isn't where Zoom is held, but let's say you want to drop a class because Zoom is just too hard. But this is my UCLA. This is what you see when you first get on UCLA. And behind it is where this is what happens when we look at the actual content and the code behind it. As you can see, there's an HTML header letting us know like this entire page is HTML, as long as some script pages which define the behavior of the actual web page. And then somewhere in this code, a CSS file is being linked. It's like not easy to see right now, but I'll show you how to get to it in a bit. And let's go to the next page. Okay, so over here is a quick snapshot of Chrome Devtool. This is the main tool we'll be using to inspect different websites. Throughout this workshop, I'll be doing a short demo on how to look at it. But essentially, if you just open it up, you can see the different CSS files as long as the script that's being linked to it. And with that, I will start the demo. Okay, so how do I exit presentation mode? Okay, so let's start with something relatively simple. And let's say we visit google.com. So pretty standard, this is the Google search bar you'll see. And first off, to open Chrome Devtool, there's two ways. You can press Ctrl-Shift-I, or you can simply right-click and then go to inspect. And on the right-hand side, what you'll see is you'll see the various HTML code. And when you hover over the specific code element, you'll be able to see that it will highlight the specific element. So let's say today I want to look at specifically this Google logo over here. I can actually right-click and inspect it here. And when I hover over here, you can see this HTML tag refers directly to the Google image. Now, for the sources, you can see here are the images associated with it. And as long more questions? Question mark? Okay. Now, Google has encrypted some of the functionalities inside its HTML page. So here are some JavaScript functions, and here are some more. But most of the time, you can actually go to sources, and there will be like a JavaScript tag underneath here that you'll be able to examine. Another way you can, and for the CSS, actually, they will be shown right over here underneath the style page. So here you'll be able to see the different attributes or properties assigned to it, maybe some specific tags associated with it, and also where the actual CSS can be found. And this is really useful, for example, if you're trying to build websites. So for JavaScript, this part is a little more to this. So over here, when you go to the console tab, what you can first do is, this is sort of just like a JavaScript command line in a way. You can do like console.log hello world. And by doing this, you can see that the console spits back hello world, very similar to how if we're in Python and we do like print hello world, you can do that. But it also allows you to directly interact with these over here. So let's say today I want to change the content of who's ACM Cyber. First thing first, I can actually expand this first, expand recursively, and you can change the content over here. So let's say today I want to say I do that. You can see the content on the web page itself is updated. But then let's say today I actually want to change the styling of this. Well, I can go to the right-hand side and then, oops, wait, I can go on the right-hand side. I can disable them. I can essentially add and remove CSS, but I can also go into the JavaScript console and to specify them. So let's say I want to select this element. Oh, hold on. Here we go. And then what this does is this will actually put sort of like a pointer in C++. It will put that tag and allow me to associate it with the $0. So when I go into the console, I can actually do $0.0.background, .style.background, sorry, is equal to, let's say I want to change the background to white. We can do that. There's a lot more things you can do with the console, obviously, but again, we're not going to go into too much detail in this workshop. So that is basically all for HTML, CSS. If you like that, is there any question regarding this part? There's no question. I'm going to keep moving on. No? Okay. Okay, so now that we have covered the basic of HTML and CSS, we're going to be going over the actual structure of a website. So the main question here now is, when you go to the website, how exactly do you get the code for it? And in response to that, most website is set up in a way such that you have a client and you have a server side. And the majority of the time when you're accessing, you'll be on the client side, and the server is a machine. So the machine that I'd be connecting with. So for example, let's say today we're using Firefox and we access google.com. What happens essentially is your browser, Firefox, will be the client, and it will send a machine on Google side, which has a domain google.com. And when you access it, it will send back the files associated with that website. So in our case, it will send back the HTML page along with the CSS and JavaScript. And most of the time, it does this through HTTP request. So if you're not here or if it's been a while since we covered HTTP and HTTPS, since are in one of the previous workshops, but so here's a really brief review. Essentially, HTTP request is one of the major ways of how the client communicate with the browser. So go full screen. Okay. So most of the time, most of the time, HTTP request allows you to get information from the server. It also allows you to send information to the server along with some other manipulation. But this is what a standard HTTP request looks like when you do a curl. So it will basically contain the date that happens, along with some headers that help identify, essentially metadata that specify the request. Maybe if you receive some cookies, you'll see them here. Don't worry about the cookie part. We'll go into more detail later. But most of the time, the HTTP request follows a REST API. What would you do the curl on and how? I'm gonna let the other cyber officer answer that while I continue. Okay, so most of the time when you send an HTTP request to a website, you'll be following something called the REST API. You can essentially break down the REST API into these 4 different things called get, post, put, and delete. The majority of the time, you'll see a get and post request. And essentially, this says that you're trying to get information from the server. Post is you're trying to send information to the server. Put is updating. And delete is pretty self-explanatory. You're trying to remove information from the server. One quick note is the misconception. Sometimes you'll like jumble REST API and HTTP. The REST API is just a way of how you use HTTP. So be very, very mindful of that. All right, so far no other question except for curl. So let me continue. Okay, so that was essentially all we were going to cover regarding the actual HTTP request. We'll tell you guys how to forge and how to make your own request later. But we're going to talk about the robot.txt really quickly. So to begin with, what exactly is a robot.txt? Well, it's basically a file somewhere on your domain that helps the web crawler. That tells the web crawler specific interaction they're allowed to have. So web crawlers are essentially these code or like little machine that like they essentially explore the web and then take snapshots of it. So things that they might take is like an actual image of the website, maybe some metadata about it. And one other really cool thing about web crawlers is it allows websites such as the Wayback Machine to happen. Or yeah. So one of the, and in case you don't know, the Wayback Machine essentially allows you to see websites back in the days, like really, really old websites. So obviously the google.com we know today is very, very different from when it first started, or actually 10 years ago. And because once in a while, web crawlers just like go through the website and take a snapshot, it's able to record the different website and the state they're in. And for google.com, that has been it has like a really, really long history, and we'll be able to see it in a bit when I finish loading. This is taking a while. Okay. I think I'm gonna reload this, and I'm gonna sort of keep talking about. Oh, here we go. Okay, so right now we're in 2021. You can see that throughout the entire month, the web crawler have like taken some snapshots of Google.com, but then it allows us to actually go back to 2000 when Google, like in the early days of Google, and you're actually able to see what Google looks like then by clicking on one of these timestamps. Yeah, as you can see, very, very different from the current Google today. It looks really old and kind of janky. Okay, but essentially, robot.txt, sometimes there's like routes that you don't want them to go into, like whether they have like sensitive data, whether they have like really sensitive data that you don't want to be recorded. You can specify routes that tells the web crawler to sort of ignore and disallow them from visiting. And that's essentially what the robot.txt file do. Okay, so now that I've covered like the sort of structure of the web, I'll be briefly covering the different types of attack and vulnerabilities that we'll be showing you guys throughout this entire quarter's workshop. So first of all, unprotected routes and data. Maybe there's some contents that you have left out on your website, or maybe there's some routes you don't want it to be visited. These can prove to be vulnerabilities. Client-side authentication. So JavaScript obviously allows you to execute scripts, but then the problem here is if you authenticate on the client side, they can just rewrite the code and grant you access. Cookie injection and stealing. We'll be going over what a cookie is, but that's one of the topics. Identity spoofing essentially is like how do the server know who is behind the client and if the client is a valid person. And also there comes like really brute force attacks like DDoSing, where you overflood the server with requests so that it slows down and makes the entire service unavailable to everyone. Obviously, there's like a lot more, and a lot more of the more severe and easier to like access vulnerabilities and attacks. But I'm gonna let the other officers cover that in the other workshops. And now I'll turn it over to Josh, who will start. Josh, I think I will stop sharing screen now, and you should share your own since you're also being doing the demo anyway.
Yeah. Okay, can you guys see it? All right, sweet. All right, thank you, Henry. So Henry talked a lot of good stuff about, how things work and, what some code might look like. But I think it's also really important for us to look at how we might want to apply things to our projects, right? And in particular, the security aspect of things, right? So let's go ahead and just do an example, right? So picture this, right? You're a UCLA student, pretty ambitious. I'm sure most of you are, always wanting to be the best. And so let's say you want to build the next big web app, right? And so in order to do that, you need to use JavaScript. And so you're working on your project, right? But you run into some problems, right? And so what are these problems? Well, first of all, your code and also the JavaScript libraries that you import are exposed to vulnerabilities, right? So basically, if a hacker can look at your code and figure out what's going wrong or maybe do some bad stuff, that's probably not good for your project, right? The other thing is that people might try to steal your code. So obviously, like Henry was going on the Chrome Devtools, you could easily just stroll through, look at your code, and someone could just steal your algorithm, the formatting of your code, and just take your entire project. So what can we do about this, right? And so that's when we can introduce JavaScript obfuscation. And so obfuscation is a way to make our source code really hard to understand, to steal, to copy, to reverse engineer, however you want to say it, right? But basically, it's just an extra layer of protection for your code so that people can't do bad things. And so to be technical, it's measured by potency and resilience. But obviously, you probably don't care about that too much, right? So what are some other benefits of this? Well, in addition to making our source code really hard to understand, typically obfuscation uses compression or minification. And so basically, let's say you have some code, it'll look at your code, it'll make your variable shorter, it'll delete comments or unnecessary code, and overall, it could reduce your code size as well as reduce the download time. And so we all know that smaller is better. So keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some examples of this. So let me open these links up. Okay, sweet. So if we look at this, first website, we see that there's some example code, pretty self-explanatory. You have a function and sorry, it will print out hello world, and then after it'll call it. So in total, it should just print out hello world. And so if we go ahead and obfuscate it, right off the bat, you can tell this is disgusting, right? You're probably looking at this like, what the heck just happened? But chances are, or the thing is, that this is obfuscated. And so basically what they did was they changed up some of the code to make it look really weird and disgusting, but it should still work. So if you go ahead and go to our console and paste this in, we could see that it still prints out hello world, right? So that's just what obfuscation does. It makes it really nasty, so you don't want to like look at this, and it keeps the functionality of your code, right? And if we go to a website like this, beautifier.io, which could be a deobfuscator, and we print this in and we run it, we can see that even though it makes the formatting really nice, it doesn't. You can't see what the original source code is, right? It's pretty hard to understand. Maybe you could try to do it yourself, but obviously, I don't want to do that. So you can just leave it at that, right? But if we do the same obfuscation using a different tool, right? So let's go ahead and take this code and go to this other website, obfuscate it, right? And we get this code. Let's make sure it works first. So let's go to our console, and we see that it still works. All right, awesome. And we put it into this deobfuscator. We can see that we get the source code, right? So obviously, this website's not as strong as the first one that we had, but obviously it still obfuscates. So if you're a beginner and you look at it, you're probably wondering like, oh, I don't want to mess with that. But if you're a hacker, maybe you'll try to deobfuscate it. And so yeah, let's see. And in addition to that, let's go ahead and look at one more example. So if we go here, if we go to our sources tab, in addition to looking at the source code, there's also a tab where you can use Chrome Devtools as a text editor, right? So to work on your projects or to include snippets. And so snippets are just ways you can run some JavaScript code on the current page that you're on, right? And so here is another example of obfuscation. Does anyone want to try to guess what this will do? If you want to guess, you can put in the chat. I'll give you 10 seconds. I'll give you 10 seconds. The world, 1 + 1. All right, 3, 2. Okay, yeah, no one got it. That's unfortunate. But let's go ahead and run it, right? So you could do that with this run snippet button or Command Enter if you're on Mac, and it does alert 1, right? So this is the same thing as if we were to type into our console alert 1, right? But they just obfuscate it to look like this, right? So this is just another example of how obfuscation works. Yeah, it does look. Yeah, we don't mess with that. No. All right, sweet. And so, obviously, as we saw, there are different tools and different obfuscators. And so if you were serious about your product and you want to go this route, you might want to use a premium service or one that you have to pay for because it's probably more reliable and safer than these free tools. Right. All right. Next, we can go ahead and talk about user agent.
Josh, hold on. There's a quick question for you in the chat.
Which one? Is it by Alex?
Yeah, the platform one.
Okay. Does obfuscation affect what platforms can handle it? Like, would a JavaScript obfuscator rely on a feature which isn't in, say, Chrome 51 while your original JavaScript would be fine? The obfuscator, I believe, okay, maybe don't quote me on this, I don't know. But I believe that it basically just makes your code look differently. And so whatever browser you're using, it should be able to read it. So even though you're on a different, I guess like a different version, if the original source code works on that, chances are that the obfuscated code will still work. So that's what I would say. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, let me know if there are. Okay, but I will move on. So yes, so we could talk about the user agent. So what is the user agent? The user agent is an HTTP request header that identifies the browser you're using, its version, and your operating system. So basically every time you request something from the server will look at your header and it'll look at your user agent and it'll give you something back depending on whatever it sees, right? So here's an example. This is what my user agent is. And so if you look at this, you can see that I'm using a MacBook. I'm on Chrome, and then it supports features from Mozilla, KHTML, Gecko, and Safari, right? And so you might be wondering, I'm on a MacBook, I'm on Chrome. Why doesn't it just say those two things, right? And the reason behind that is because when web browsers were first being introduced, whenever a new one came along, they would basically just want to, instead of making their own like separate word, they would just want to add on or maybe take the same features as other web browsers. So for example, Chrome, you can see it just adds this keyword like Mozilla, and that's the way the server will know that they want features from Mozilla. And so that's why, when you look at user agents, it's going to be like a bunch of words, but it just means that they have a bunch of features. So there's that. Okay, any questions? Okay, just let me know if there are questions. All right, and finally, I'm sure we've all gone through different websites, and then we see a pop-up like this saying something about cookies. And chances are, if you're like me, you either just click the X, you click yes, or you just like ignore it and just keep scrolling around. But what are these cookies, right? Yes, maybe. So cookies are strings of data stored by your web browser that identify your computer and data as a way to remember stateful information. And so what does that mean? Basically, HTTP, which is the way we, the client, communicate with the server, is typically called stateless because every time we communicate with them, or each request that we send is independent of other requests. So, if we're looking at an example, let's say we're not using cookies, just plain HTTP. Say we're on Amazon and we want to add something to our cart. So every time we send a request to Amazon, say, oh, can you add this to our cart? We would first have to log in and to our credentials every time because it doesn't remember that we're already logged in. And so cookies are just a way for us to make sure that we're authenticated, that we're logged in, and maybe just to remember other information such as our settings or any other data specific to our browser. So if that didn't make sense, don't worry, I have another example, right? So, I'm sure, as you all know, there's a lot of crazy stuff going in the news. And if you're like me, you probably don't read the news very often. And so maybe you're like, hey, I want to go check out New York Times and read some news. So let's say, this is your first time going to New York Times. And so what you do is you click the link and you communicate to the server, hey, can I get the news page? And they'll be like, oh yeah, sure. Do you have a cookie? Oh, you don't? Okay, here, let me send you a cookie and the news page. And so now you have this cookie that helps the server identify you. And so now every time you send a new request to the server will check your cookie and then it'll remember you. So maybe it'll remember your settings. Maybe you change like the font size or you change certain settings of like tabs that you like or whatever it may be. And so that's just how they communicate. And then one other thing about cookies. So chances are you've gone to a website and there's a bunch of like advertisements on the side. And so when you see those, that the web page that you're currently on is actually loading cookies from other servers. So that's what they call, third-party cookies. And so that's how, like companies like Amazon will be able to get information about you. So, if you go to a certain website and there's an ad from there, then they get that cookie and then they'll be able to tell like, oh, you visit this site. So this is the kind of stuff that you like. So kind of scary, but at the same time, that's just how it is. So yeah. Okay, other specifics, just real quick. There's session versus persistent. So session means that the cookie will expire when you close your browser, and persistent means that there's a certain deadline or like max age before it expires. So maybe it's like a week or maybe it's like 10 seconds. Cookies are vulnerable to CSRF. And this is actually something we're going to be talking about next week. So if you want to learn a little bit more, come out next week. But just a general gist is, hackers can do bad things because you have cookies. So that's the gist of it. And you can access cookies with document.cookie, right? And we can do this in our console. And here is an example that we will be doing in a bit. So this is just other information, but let's just go ahead and look at our demo. All right, so let's go to our favorite website, ACM Cyber. Right, and let's go ahead and open up Chrome Devtools. And so, yeah, let's go to our console, and like we talked about earlier, we can access our cookies with document.cookie. So let's go ahead and do that. Right, and if we run that, we could see, oh wait, we have no cookies, right? So we could tell that this is a way to access our cookies, and we can see that we have no cookies. But if we go to a different website, such as like Cool Math Games, our second favorite website, right? And we run the same command, document.cookie, right? We can see that there are cookies that are being loaded, right? So certain websites will automatically load them when you first come in, others won't, right? But let's say we want to add a cookie. How would we do that? Basically, you do the same thing. So you access your cookies, document.cookie, and you set it equal to the cookie that you want. And so typically, the very base case is it has a name and a value. So for example, I could do name is equal to Josh. And so I can save that. And when I do document.cookie, I can see the cookie here. Awesome. Oh, sorry. Let's add one more. So document.cookie is equal to cyber is equal to cool. And now you can see that there are 2 cookies. So those are ways to add cookies. And another way to access them or look at them or change them would be through this applications tab. So in here, there's a bunch of information about your storage, your cache, your cookies, and all that. And so if you go to this tab, you can see that the cookies I made are here. And you can go ahead and change them through here if you just double click one of the sections. So let's say I want to change my name to like Arnold, right? That's a pretty cool name, right? And I save that here, it shows up here. And when I run this again, it shows up here, right? So those are just different ways to do them through both of these different tabs. And then let's go ahead and add this other cookie because this gives a little more information, right? So if we look at this, we can see, so our name is best friend, our value is Joe Bruin, and expires on Saturday the 16th at midnight. And it's always important to note that when you do this, you have to do it in UTC time, and you have to do it in this specific format, or else it won't work. And then path and secure, those are just other parameters that you can add to be more specific. And if we go here, we can see that it also saved. So that is awesome. Right, and let's say we want to delete our cookies. Let's say I don't want these cookies anymore. Like they're annoying. Get them out of here. How do we do that? Well, in this tab, you can just right-click and delete. Or if you go into here, what you would do is you would set the max age or the expiration date to some time in the past. So if we actually go document.cookie is equal to like name is equal to Arnold, right? And we say max age is equal to 0, which means like 0 seconds. And we save that. Then when we run document.cookie, we see that it did disappear. So those are just some ways you can access things with cookies, change things, and play around with that. Sorry. All right, are there any questions about that? I'm gonna assume no. Cool. All right, and finally, we can go over to this networks tab. Right. And so the networks tab is where we can see the communication between the browser and the server. And it's a way for us to make sure that all our resources are being uploaded or downloaded properly. So things will be recorded as long as this red button is on. So let's go ahead and refresh. And here we can see these are the resources being loaded, right? So here are the names, the status 200, meaning it loaded properly, the size, oh, so from memory cache. All right, let me disable that. All right, so now it looks like it's like we're visiting the site for the first time, right? The CSS, all this other stuff, and the waterfall shows how things loaded in real time, which is pretty cool. And so if we go ahead and click one of these, we can get some general information about the request, right? So we can see that it's a GET request. This is the URL. If you look down, you can look at, the cookies that we still had, a cache, whatever it is. And at the very bottom, you can see the user agent. So this is where I actually got my user agent. This is how I got it. I just clicked here and copy and pasted that. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, right? Before that, Henry talked about different requests, and GET is pretty common, but the second most common is probably POST. So POST is basically us sending information to the server. And a way we would do that is typically if you see, like buttons like this where you're trying to register, you're probably sending information to the server. So if I go ahead and click this, I'm not going to fill anything out, so it'll probably give me an error. But if I click this and we look at here, it's 400. You can see that it's a post request, right? And we can also get all the other information like the request URL, all that good stuff, right? So that is that, right? And so yeah, let's talk about the user agent, right? So let's go to this site actually. So how do we change our user agent, right? We can easily see it at the bottom when we click one of these tabs, right? But how do we change it? And so the way we would do that is if you actually click escape, it should open up the console. And so what we want to open is this network conditions tab. So the way to do that would be through the three dots here, and you open network conditions. The three dots on the other side, more tools, network conditions. Or if you want to be fancy, you could do like Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P, and then do like show network conditions, right? So those are three different ways to open it, right? And so here you can enable disable cache, change the speed of your network, and importantly, you can change the user agent, right? And so here we can choose whatever we would like as our user agent, and in doing so, when we refresh the page, the server thinks that we are on Firefox on an Android mobile. And so you can see, the formatting change. And if you look over here, there's like the get it on Google Play because it thinks we're on Android. And so this is an example of what we call user agent spoofing, or just basically tricking the server to thinking that we're on a different browser. And the final thing I want to talk about is this network request blocking thing. And so this is the same thing, or we get here the same way as network conditions. You go to three dots, right? All right, let's go on this page actually. Right. And what this does is basically, let's say we look at our networks tab and we look at all the resources being downloaded. Let's say we want to block a certain thing because maybe we see a script that we think is pretty shady, or maybe we want to see what our website looks like without the CSS, right? What we would do is we would enable it, and we would just add the certain file that we want to block, right? So I already have style.css, but let's additionally add wordmark.csv or svg, wordmark.svg, right? And this is the logo right here, right? And so if we refresh the page, then we should be able to see the site without these things being included, right? And so we can see that it got blocked because we added this thing. And so that's just a way for you to play around with things. Maybe you want to see what it looks like, or just mess around and just have some fun. So are there any questions about the stuff I talked about? Okay, awesome. All right, in that case, I think I will hand it back over to Henry.
Yep. Thanks, Josh. All right. So just last thing, I'm going to be going over how to use Postman. Postman is essentially a tool that is used to make HTTP requests to specific URL and servers. They're really, really useful when you want to do essentially just like poke around at a website and see what response it gives back. So either you're trying to hack someone, or if you're trying to build your own website. Oh, yeah. If you're trying to build your own website, you can use Postman to test it. Okay, so let me just share my screen. So when you first open Postman, this is basically what you'll see. You'll most likely be greeted with like this interface, maybe without the left-hand side. And we're mostly going to pay attention on the right-hand side. So on the top side is where your requests go. And you actually get your response back. So on top right now, let's say here are some parameters and authorization tokens, but for now, let's just go with we're going to make an HTTP request. It's going to be a GET request. And I'm going to specify this link over here, which is a URL endpoint I prepared before the workshop. And when I hit it, it's just going to respond really back normally as a JSON. And all I get back from the server is a string, which says hello from Lambda, because this is actually an AWS Lambda endpoint. And that is essentially it. Now, so a lot of the things that we saw in Josh's demo is you can specify the user agent, you can specify some cookies. You can actually see all of these here. Like I can specify my user agent as 3 smiley faces rather than the default. And over here, I believe you can also see. Oh, actually, you cannot. Never mind. But I didn't specify it here. But on some requests, the server will actually see user agent as 3 smiley face. But let's say today we're trying to access Google, and we get a lot more headers back, including the date, and we get some cookies back as well. I'm not sure what these cookies are associated with. Oh, and quick thing, the HTTP only, such that, so in Josh's demo, he was able to access cookies through document.cookie, but just so you know, when this says HTTP only, when this is set to true, the cookies in there will not show up. And just a heads up, because this is for security reason. But anyway, on over here in the body, we can see there's some CSS over here, some styling going on. There's some JavaScript. Obviously, I think these are like encrypted or no, I can't pronounce that word. I'm not gonna try. And there's some HTTP over here, and you can actually preview it. And this gives you a very rundown version of Google. But obviously, this is not intended to replace your web browser. This is more intended for you to say you want to, give it a different parameter, or let's say you want to do some authorization work where you don't want to, build an entire website, an entire front end, just so you can send an HTTP request to the server. The other kind of HTTP request you'll be most likely sending is a post request. So over here, this is again a standard post request. I'm just gonna click send, and then the server actually just spits back at me the status code of 200. That means the request went through fine. I can't really preview this since this essentially is just a JSON, along with some headers regarding the response, and a body which contains our actual information. But now let's say suppose you want to log in or give the server some information. You will actually go under body, and you'll go under raw, and let's say today I want to say you have a username, and then you want to specify it. Let's say I'm Henry, so I want to send my username as Henry, and my password is noodles. I don't know why, like throughout the entire challenge you'll find the word noodles a lot, because that's what I had in mind when I was building it. Anyway, disregarding that. Oops, hold on. I think I did some wonky stuff. Oh no. Did I endpoint break? Hold on, maybe I shouldn't do this. No, I broke something. Oh wait, I think I wasn't supposed to have the comma and then my bad. There we go. Yeah, thanks, Peter. As you can see, essentially the data it sends back is just whatever I send it. I just wanted to send me back whatever I send it, and you can see that it got what I sent it, and then it sent it right back inside the data. And as you can see, there's our regular message that you can see here. If the response also says cookie, you'll be able to find them underneath this tab. Obviously, the responses I sent back does not have any cookies, so they're not here. Sometimes the cookie won't be set due to security reason, but if you go under the network tab, you can actually see them under the headers. There'll be something called like set cookie. It'll be very self-explanatory, but that's where you'll find it. Yeah, but those are essentially everything I believe you'll need for Postman. Yeah, any questions regarding it? Did everyone that wanted to install it was able to install it? I want to say like this is like completely not needed, but it's highly recommended, because if you don't do this, you'll most likely be like editing or like modifying the HTML code, and you can make the request in some very whack way inside HTML and inside the Google Devtool. But it's like a lot easier if you just use Postman. Okay. Quick last minute announcement is we wrote a reward system just to give you more incentive, regarding coming to our workshop and doing the actual challenges. So if you get enough points, or if you get if you do write-ups for CTF challenges, you can submit it to us and get a chance to play a gacha, and you get random prizes. Yeah.
Some of them include like the cool background that me and Jerry and Stephen have.
Yeah.
And Ellie.
And
Cyber gacha.
Kimberly.